Welcome to another episode of the RinkMasters Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Kroom, joined with Noah Jeter today.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty good, pretty fly. So before we get into our content today, we have an interview with Dan O'Connor. He is the voice of the Vancouver Giants. He's a longtime Western Hockey League broadcaster. And then after that, we'll be diving into just to shine some light on some of the players that have come out of Northern BC here and to prove that Northern BC can play a pivotal part in the game of hockey. And with that, we are going on to our interview with Dan O'Connor. Welcome, Dan O'Connor, to the RinkMasters Podcast.
Great to be here, and Tyler. I mean, I think it's awesome that you've established this show, and you've become a can't miss podcast for any hockey fan in the North. It's great to see, and it's an honor to be on here. I appreciate you reaching out.
Oh, thank you, Dan. It means so much to hear that. So, growing up, where did your love for sports begin?
I remember one day, I must have been about 5 or 6 years old. I walked into my parents' bedroom, and my dad was having a nap on a Saturday. And I remember looking at the TV that was on, and I saw the green uniforms of the Hartford Whalers skating against the white and red uniforms of the Montreal Canadiens. And my child's brain just started to watch this game, and my dad kind of woke up and was like, yeah, like, this is hockey. And it was love at first sight. It really was. I mean, I started watching, and my dad kind of got a sense that, okay, like, maybe my son likes hockey. So he pulled out his collection of VHS tapes of old hockey games that he had recorded from his earlier days when he lived in Winnipeg and when he lived in Edmonton. And so I had a collection of old taped hockey games from the Edmonton Oilers Stanley Cup run of the 80s. And so as I got older, I mean, I if the Canucks were on Hockey Night in Canada, we would watch, or it really didn't matter who was on Hockey Night in Canada, I would watch. And if I was bored and if I had downtime, I would put a hockey game on the TV, because we had about 10 different games on VHS tapes. So by about age 7 or age 8, I could probably recite a majority of the Edmonton Oilers lineup and list them off numerically. And they won the Stanley Cup against the New York Islanders in 1984, and I remember that the deciding game was 5-2. And these kinds of things just started to kind of retain in my mind a little bit. Then you start playing street hockey with your neighbors and with your buddies outside, and then during recess, and then you sign up for organized hockey. But the early memories of like that moment for me where I fell in love with sports and with hockey was probably traced back to kind of seeing that first hockey game on TV, and maybe being old enough to kind of clue into like, oh, this is kind of neat. This is kind of cool.
That's really cool. And so, as you're watching those old tapes of hockey games, I mean, we know that you got into doing sports broadcasting. Was there a broadcaster in those tapes that you really took a liking to?
I mean, the first one was probably, it wasn't even on those tapes, to be honest. It was more when I started to listen to Canucks games on the radio. Because at the time, the Canucks would, every single game of theirs would be broadcast on CKNW, and the legendary Jim Robson with Tom Larscheid would be calling Canuck games. And as I got a little older, the family room at my house in Tsawwassen, we had some space in the den where we had a hockey net set up, and my dad and I would go downstairs and we would play hockey. So I would be the goalie and he would shoot on me, or he would be the goalie and I would shoot on him. Yeah. And we'd have a tape, we'd have a stereo beside us that had the Canucks game on the radio. So we'd be shooting pucks at one another, or shooting like a tennis ball at one another. And the Canucks game would be on the radio. And I remember listening to Jim Robson and Tom Larscheid call Canuck games. And, if we were in the car at night and there was a Canuck game on, we'd have it on. And it sort of got to a point where, I didn't want to go to bed until I knew if the Canucks had won or not. And probably a bit of a nightmare for my parents at the time. But
Right.
Jim Robson, to me, was the first broadcaster that resonated with me. And that was the first name of many now, but the first name that stuck with me as a broadcaster that really influenced me, for sure.
That's awesome. As you're going through you playing hockey with your dad in the basement, listening to the game. That is actually what me and my brother used to do, listening to you do the Cougar games on the radio. And so those are the best moments.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I think, like, what better way to kind of fall in love with the game, and you're shooting on the net, and all of a sudden you hear the noise and the sound of a goal being scored. And terrific memories and things that I'm very grateful for years and years and years later, because it really did kind of shape my love for the game.
Absolutely. And so, as we know, you got into broadcasting. You've been a long time broadcaster now in the Western Hockey League. How has your experience been working in the league, the connections you've made, and the people you've met along the way?
Oh man, I'll try to answer this question somewhat quickly, but I mean, the WHL has been it's been incredible, and I think now were there a season in 2020-21 to this point, it would be my 10th in the WHL. And so, I think back to the last 10 years of my life and the friendships that have been made, the games that have been played, the experiences that I've gotten to enjoy. And you know what, and some real tough times too, and some life lessons, and some growing up, and a lot of highs, a lot of lows, a lot of sleepless nights, and a lot of days on that Prince George Cougar bus where, you've just finished a road trip and you've just won that final game, and there's no sleep quite like the sleep that you get after a big win on the road. And
Right.
So I mean, it's really hard to kind of compartmentalize it and to put it all into a box. But I think about the past 10 years, and I think about my life in the WHL, and really my entire career in junior hockey. I mean, it's, you don't really know it unless you're in it.
Right.
And that, for someone who digs ditches, or somebody who is an open heart surgeon. I mean, we all have different things about our jobs that hopefully excite us and hopefully really get us going and hopefully light our fire. And I've been very lucky in that, the WHL, from the word go, even before I started calling games in the WHL, growing up watching the Vancouver Giants, we were a billet family for the Giants when I got into my later years in high school. So going to, and it was going to Giants games with a tape recorder in my hand and practicing my play-by-play, which, gave me a demo tape to hand to radio stations. I mean, the WHL will forever be tied to me. Or I guess maybe the better way to put it is that I will always hold the WHL in extremely high regard, just based on the memories and the relationships and all of the experiences linked to this league.
Right on. And so it all started when you moved from Tawasin to come to Prince George to be the voice for the Cougars. What was it like working for the Cougars, and how was your time here?
Well, I mean, from Tawasin to Prince George, it didn't quite go like that. It went first, it was Tawasin to Chetwynd, BC, to call Junior B games, from Chetwynd to North Battleford, Saskatchewan, to call Junior A games in the SJHL for 4 years. But Prince George was interesting because when, at the time I was 26 years old, and I was really happy. I was living in Saskatchewan. I had a great job working for a great company, a great radio station with a really good team. Mm-hmm. But when the call comes and when you learn of a job opening in the WHL, I had applied for other WHL jobs in the past and I got turned down, wasn't quite ready, wasn't quite the right fit, wasn't the right situation. But Prince George made sense in so many respects. I mean, I was familiar with the city because of my time in Chetwynd. If I needed to go buy a pair of jeans, I drove 3 hours to Prince George to go and do that because there was no place in Chetwynd to really do that. Right. So having a familiarity with Prince George, being back in the province of BC, being close to my dad, who, still to this day lives in Cloverdale, not far out of Surrey and Vancouver. And then just having some connection, having some familiarity, and knowing a few of the personalities involved. The voice of the Cougars before me was a guy by the name of Andy Neal, who, ironically, when he left his job in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, I took that job. And we sort of, in a weird way, stayed in touch through that. And then 4 years later, when he's working with the Prince George Cougars and he leaves the Cougars to go and take a job in Victoria, well, one of my first calls was to Andy Neal saying, "Hey, man, remember me? Like, this job seems like it's one that makes sense." And actually, Andy was very influential. He along with several others were very influential in kind of putting my name forward to the Prince George Cougars brass. Another guy that really helped out was Dale Sipe, who's now one of my bosses with the Vancouver Giants. He's a family friend. I've known him forever. But, having Andy's backing, having Dale's backing, I mean, it was, it all felt pretty seamless, and had that phone call and got hired. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, man, you're in the big time. You're in Prince George. And the first year in Prince George was really tough, to be honest. It was the 2011-12 season. Brett Connolly was in PG for 1 day of training camp, went to Tampa and never came back.
Right.
And so you take a 50, 60 goal scorer out of your lineup right then and there. And then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, okay, now what? Well, the Cougars just a really young team. A lot of nights that first season, there were 6, 7, sometimes even 8 16-year-olds in the lineup.
Right.
And you know what? And credit to them. They battled, they competed, but you just don't win a lot when that's your reality in the WHL. So, there were some tough losses. There were some tough road trips. It took some getting used to really kind of trying to figure out some of the personalities and figure out a lot of the, just figuring out how to do things and managing the expectation, managing the pressure and the exposure and just the significance of the Western Hockey League. It took 1.5 years for me to finally clue in and figure out and realize what I had to do my job well. Right. And fortunately, here we are 8.5 years later, and I'm still in the league and hopefully still doing a pretty good job.
Definitely. So, what type of pressure does that put onto your position with an organization, right? When you have a departure of a big player and you got to try and sell the players within the program, how much, how does that impact your job?
Well, I mean, no game is the same. And I think that so often, fans of an organization, you know what, you're not going to go 72-0. You're not going to win all 68 games of a season. But I think what the fans want and what the fans expect, what the management expects, what the coaches expect is a good, honest effort every night. And you know what, it's tough because you know what, you're on the bus with these guys and you're eating meals with these guys, you're staying at the same hotel, you're with the guys all the time. So when they win, you win.
Right.
When they lose, you lose. And when they get their ass handed to them 9-0 one night, you get your ass handed to you 9-0 all the same. Because you know, with Prince George and with Vancouver, I work for the team. I'm not a radio station employee who is contracted to call WHL games. I mean, it was the Cougars that signed my paycheck. It's the Vancouver Giants that signed my paycheck. So there's always going to be, you know, let's call it a bit of a bias and a hope. Like, I'm not calling games for the Vancouver Giants to hope they lose. I'm not calling games for the Prince George Cougars on the hope that they lose. Like, if you're winning, it solves a lot of problems. It makes everything better. You have a weekend at home where you have Kamloops coming to play 2 games. If you beat them twice, that day off on Sunday is amazing.
Right.
And that first day back at the rink on the Monday is amazing too, because everybody's in a good mood. You lose 2 games to Kamloops on a Friday or a Saturday, and well, chances are you might be at the rink on a Sunday because, hey, we're having a skate, we're having a practice, we got to do something, we got to watch a video, we need to have the guys at the rink on that Sunday. And then the Monday sucks because everybody's still grumpy and everybody's, and it's just kind of the written rule of hockey too, right? Like, if you lose a game, you're not sitting on the bus like goofing off and making faces and sending Snapchats. Like, your mouth is shut, your phone light is dim, and you're not drawing any attention to yourself whatsoever that could be perceived as negative. Like, if you lose, shut your mouth, be quiet, and the sun will rise.
Right. It's basically take your licks and move on.
Bingo.
Yeah. So, you know, you ended up going to work for the Vancouver Giants. You know, how special was that opportunity to be able to do what you love to do close to home and for your hometown team?
Yeah, I mean, in one breath, it's extremely special and quite literally a boyhood dream realized, right? Like, you're watching the Vancouver Giants play, you know, you're practicing your craft in the top row of the Pacific Coliseum, watching the Vancouver Giants play, and then all of a sudden one day you get to do it for real. Incredibly gratifying. But in the same breath of it was way tougher to leave Saskatchewan than people might realize and understand. Leaving Prince George, it was the same thing.
Right.
You know, I mean, Vancouver's home, the Giants are home, they're in my blood. I think for a lot of reasons that the move made sense. And, you know, for, you know, the past 3 seasons and going to a WHL final in a Game 7 and watching guys like Bowen Byram and Ty Benson and Ty Ronning and, you know, the list goes on. The Giants experience has been tremendously special for me. But it was an incredibly hard decision to make. I mean, the Prince George Cougars were and are still an organization that I hold extremely near and dear to my heart. I mean, I bled for that organization for 6 years, and you know, through some harrowing lows to some tremendous highs. You know, there was never a day with the Prince George Cougars that I didn't feel blessed and honored and so excited to work for them. But you know what, it got to a point where I think that I'd been there 6 years, and, I guess anybody who wants to reach the highest level, you look at an opportunity and, okay, like, I get to go to Vancouver, and at the time I could be on TSN 1040 calling games, and then now it's being on Sportsnet 650, and
Yeah.
you're in the same city as the Canucks, and you've got all of this exposure, and you've got all of this, pressure, I suppose. Like just the stakes were different. It felt like the right move that had to be made just to continue that upward trajectory and that upward growth. And in many ways, it absolutely has accomplished exactly that. So, I mean, to be in Vancouver now, and being in year 4, and having had some of, the experiences that I've had, wouldn't trade it for anything. But in the same breath, I want to make it very clear that, I will forever treasure the 6 years I had with the Prince George Cougars, because I feel that there were some incredible accomplishments and some great memories that, and just wonderful people associated with the city and the organization. I met my wife up there. I mean, Prince George, it is my home away from home. It is a place that I happily go to every Christmas when we're allowed to travel.
Yeah.
Every summer when we're allowed to travel. It's a place that, I will defend that city till the ends of the earth, because it means that much to me.
That's really cool. I know Prince George it's a very good community. And growing up here, I moved away for a time. I was living in Nanaimo, so on Lower Mainland. And, of course I moved back, and I'm kind of glad I moved back. There's something special about this community. And, especially when, hockey's good here, the community really also rallies behind hockey. So that's something I'll definitely cherish.
Totally. And I mean, I think that support is great. And that's just kind of junior hockey to a T, right? I mean, you've got so many people. I mean, for many folks, it's their socializing. It's the way they spend their Friday and their Saturday night. They go to the game, they see their friends. You bring the grandkids, you bring the kids, there's something for everybody. And if the team wins, and if they play hard, and you drive home with a smile on your face, and it doesn't take too long to get out of the parking lot, I mean, that's the good stuff.
Absolutely. And so you giving your answer back there, you were talking about, game 7, you got to see guys like Byram play. You got to call some very exciting games within that series. What was it like being able to be the voice for a pretty intense, championship run?
I'll never forget it as long as I live. And you know what? Honestly, I mean, I talked to players that played in that series. I talked to alumni now who have since gone on and are doing other things. Something like that never leaves you. You realize, like, that situation was really unique, because the Giants were down 3-1 in that championship series. We lost game 4, 1-0 at home. You go to the rink game 5, and it's one of those weird things, because if you win game 5, you're going home and you're packing your suitcase. Right. And you're either going to be coming home in 3 days, or you're coming home in 2 weeks. Because if you win game 6 and game 7, then you're off to Halifax, and you're off to the Memorial Cup. And I'm telling my now wife, like, I don't know, like, I might see you. I might see you Tuesday. I might see you in June. Right. Like, so for the Giants to win game 6 to win game 5 first at home, and to go back to Prince Albert, to go and win game 6, and then to go to game 7, I'll never forget just the energy that day, the focus that day, the energy in the building that day. The game itself was incredible. And then to have 60 minutes not be enough, and then to go into overtime, and you're either a goal away from jubilation or heartbreak. And the unfortunate thing with that is somebody's got to lose. And
Right.
when Dante Hanoun scored the goal and when Prince Albert won the championship, you've got a job to do, right? You're broadcasting the game, so you've got to, you can't be a total homer about it. You've got to give the moment its credence, and you've got to give the moment its respect, which I've listened back to that goal a few times, and I hope I did that. I think I did that, but then you sign off and you go downstairs, then you see, players that haven't taken their gear off, players that are sitting in, standing with their families outside the dressing room, like crying into their dad's shoulder or crying into their teammate's shoulder because it's the closest you can get to winning a championship without winning a championship, like
Right.
going to overtime in game 7 and falling just short the way that we did. But, the cliche of champions walk together forever. There's not a ring on my finger. The Giants did not win the WHL championship in 2019, but I don't think I'm off base by suggesting that group will forever kind of hold those memories sacred and will kind of hopefully all together be linked to that season and to that moment and to that experience. And I think, one day the pain will be eased and, everybody can look at something like that and remember it for the terrific accomplishment that it was. But man, it would have been nice to win.
Oh, for sure. And Snow, before we wrap things up, you also have a podcast that you've started with former Cougars head coach Mark Hollick. What inspired you guys to get into starting The Voice, the Coach?
Yeah, you know what? That so this would be 2 summers ago. So summer of 2019, probably not all that long after we lost game 7. I was at Mark's house in White Rock, about 5 minutes away from where I live currently, and we were having a beer, and he said, you and I should start a podcast. Yeah, like, wouldn't that be something? Who has time for that? Like, haha, good one. It would be great, but golly, it's a lot of work, and who's got time for that, and who knows what that's going to look like. And then all of a sudden you fast forward a year and COVID hits, and we got into the month of May and sort of started to realize that life as we knew it was going to be forever changed and different.
Right.
And I had decided that, okay, like, I've got a bit more time on my hands. I've got the equipment. I've got the stories. I'm going to do this. And of course, I couldn't in good conscience start a podcast without calling Mark and saying, hey, I know we joked about this a year ago. Like, were you serious? Is this something that you want to do? And he said, like, of course I'm serious. Like, let's do it. And so 48 hours later, we recorded episode 1, and 28 episodes later, here we are, with no end in sight, right? So I mean, you of all people can relate to, it's addicting, and it's cathartic, and it's creative, and it's fun to hear people tell stories, and it's something that is eternal, and you can look back on in 3 years and in 10 years, and you've got this database of stories and art and creativity that you've put together. Who knows how long it's going to go? I mean, we're loving it. We're really happy with it. We're excited about it. But we're just going to keep cranking out episodes as long as people seem to be interested in listening to them. And thank goodness they are. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I never actually quite realized how much fun this hobby could be. You can listen to podcasts all the time, and where I got started was I was listening to Spit and Checklist. I'm like, wow, this seems pretty cool. And COVID hits, and it's you got all this time in your hands. You're like, well, let's get her going. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, and again, like, your show, it's been great. You've had a lot of great guests, and I hope you weren't scraping the bottom of the barrel to have me come on here, but no, I mean, you've done really well, and I think it's great to have this kind of thing, coming out of the North, and stories, and people, and ambassadors. It's great, and the job you're doing, and like the job we're all doing through this crazy time, just trying to kind of keep the game relevant and keeping ourselves sane by doing these things, I think is all really, really positive. And so kudos, man. Thank you. Thank you for thinking of me, and great job with the show. It's been fun.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you. And it was really good having you on. I know you were a guest that I wanted to have for a while. And so I saw that when I came across your podcast, I was like, I've got to get Dan on. So it was awesome.
Well, man, I feel like we barely scratched the surface. We can definitely do this again. There's all sorts of Prince George Cougar stories in the memory vault and in the memory bank that I think about often, and I'm sure we'll have a few more of these over the years.
Definitely. I'd love that. And that was our interview with play-by-play man of the Vancouver Giants, Dan O'Connor. Thank you, Dan, for coming on. It was really great to hear where your love of the game started, and to just to know how you got involved in media broadcasting, and hopefully those out there like us that would potentially want to be pursuing a line of sports broadcasting can kind of take after your steps there. And now we're going to be talking about players coming out of the North here, as we seem to be talking about the North. How about you lead that off, Noah?
Well, obviously, like you said, we're going to be shining kind of a spotlight on some of the players, or just hockey personalities, just I guess anybody involved in hockey who's kind of come out of the North and who has had some kind of a role on a bigger stage. Yeah, because I think there's a tendency to believe that we're kind of just a backwater, right? And we don't think that's true. So I mean, obviously the Cougars have had some great players, but let's not start with the Cougars right away, because just this past year, the head coach of the Stanley Cup winning team is from Prince George, who's John Cooper. So Tyler, why don't you tell us a bit about him?
Yeah, so John Cooper, of course, as we know, he's born and raised in Prince George. He moved away at a bit of a younger age, but still his northern roots are pretty strong. His family still lives here. And I think, it's really cool to see that, a local product being able to coach probably one of the best teams, the NHL has ever seen, and to ultimately win the Stanley Cup, and to potentially bring that here once COVID blows over, I think is certainly really cool for the scene here.
Yeah, it's certainly really big. And then also another recent Cup win with Brett Connolly. Obviously played for the Cougars for a number of years. He was our best player in that time frame, and represented the Capitals. Got to play with some amazing players. So, yeah, I mean, I think he's one of the more underrated players in the league. As
Probably, yeah.
as middle six forwards go, I think he's certainly underrated. I think that if he's with the right line mates, he can produce, and he has shown that. Especially in recent seasons. So yeah, kind of like, what's the significance that he's been able to actually succeed? Especially after he looked like a bust pretty early on, but now he's starting to, like in his later 20s, he's really matured and is turning into a solid player.
Yeah, no, sometimes it takes players that little bit of extra time to really mature into their NHL form. And obviously Brett Connolly's hockey days started way before the Cougars here in the North. Of course, he grew up here, played in the minor hockey system. So he's a player, I think one of the only ones that we can say has come through PGMHA, played for the Caribou Cougar alumni, then obviously on to play for the Prince George Cougars, and then goes 6 overall to Tampa Bay. I think it's really cool to say that we can sit here and say that Brett Connolly is a true Northern product. And I think he's someone that, players here in the North like myself have been able to look up to growing up. And I think that's pretty critical here, at least in Prince George for sure.
Yeah, I know. In my days when I really started to pay more attention to the Cougars, he was my favorite player. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, I love the guy. Moving down the list, there's two players now that we're going to talk about who are actually both now part owners of the Cougars. So we have Dan Hamhuis and Eric Brewer. And something that has to be said now, I'm going to mention this now. A large chunk of our list is defensemen,
Yeah.
which is ironic because in the past few years, many people have criticized the Prince George Cougars defense. So I think it's pretty ironic that most of the top players here that we're going to be talking about are defensemen. Just going to put that out there. But yeah, let's start with Dan Hamhuis.
I mean, obviously, Dan Hamhuis is probably one of the most humbled, down to earth guys you will ever meet. Reigning from Smithers, BC, came here, got to try out for the Cougars, made the team, and very quickly established himself as an elite force on the back end. Obviously his journey's been extremely successful, as going back to our interview with him on our first podcast. He won a gold medal. He's had a Stanley Cup Finals appearance. He had a long-standing NHL career. Repped the World Juniors. That's really impressive. And to say that a player of that caliber came from the North is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I mean, what always stands out to me is how humble he is. He's a great guy. Very well spoken. And yeah, he's excellent guy. Like, our interview with him was great. It was great to start off our podcast with him. That was a huge honor. I don't think we can really overstate how amazing that was to get to talk to him. And yeah, he's had an amazing NHL career. I believe he in 1,300 NHL games or something like that. Was it?
Yeah, that sounds
right.
I
think he put up almost 400 points, so that's very respectable for a defenseman.
Yeah,
especially for a fairly shut down defenseman too. So I think
Exactly.
that's again pretty impressive. So very well done from him. And obviously he just retired this year. So good for him. I wish him all the best now in his freshly retired life. So
Time to brush
Dan,
off
if you're
the golf
watching
clubs.
this, congratulations on your career. Yeah, it's been amazing to be able to watch your career go, because again, you've played in most of my hockey watching days. So yeah, all the best.
Absolutely. Time to dust off the old golf clubs.
Yeah. Eric Brewer.
Again, I was talking with my dad actually about this a couple of weeks ago. He grew up he basically went to school with Eric Brewer, and he's recalling it. Brewer was one of the tallest kids he'd ever seen at that point. And seeing that, how he used his reach and his build to just dominate in the NHL early on as a player. Like, he was physically dominant at 16, according to my dad. So obviously he had a really, really strong Western Hockey League career. As from our interview, he went to the World Juniors and got to play for a pretty good team there. And then obviously he had a pretty long-standing NHL career. He got to don the C for the St. Louis Blues, and
the Edmonton Oilers, I believe it was too.
Oh no, he just had the C with the St. Louis Blues. But yeah, no, he's had some really good success in the NHL, and I think that's another player we can look on and say, hey, yeah, he came from the North, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's certainly cool too, because like Dan Hamhuis, he's now a part owner of the Cougars, and that's been excellent. I just think it's so cool to see those big guys, former Cougars players, and both now just former hockey players, invest in the community like that and show belief in a team like that. I think that's so cool to see. So just speaks to the quality of the program here in the North that they'd want to do that, I think. So
yeah, to me, that shows that not only are they proud of where they've come from, but they believe in giving back. And I think that's a really big thing, and that's a reoccurring theme that I'm finding through this time, is interviewing guys that played in the North and that have, are coming back. So like Tyler Bruff, I've had him on Krumsky's Corner. He coaches for the Caribou Cougars now. He played for the Prince George Cougars. He's an alumni. And the North had a special lasting effect on him, as we've seen with Brewer and Ham Hughes and a lot of these guys. And as we're going to establish as well with Chara, who's an import, but just to goes to show that like the North has an impact on these players that keeps ties here. They always seem to want to come back, give back, and they stay connected. And I think that is really telling, especially when big caliber guys are willing to invest time and money into our programs here.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the big man, Zdeno Chara. So let's go on to him next. Obviously, former now captain of the Boston Bruins, played for them for a very long time, won a few cups, I believe, with them, and obviously he was very impressive defenseman, one of the best in the league in his prime, still a very serviceable defenseman. Now he plays for the Washington Capitals, still not used to those new colors.
No.
Just,
I mean,
know. Still kind of weird, but
to be fair, nobody can ever really look good wearing those Washington Capitals jerseys. They're
fair
really
enough. I'll give you that. They're not that great.
Sorry, Will.
No, but yeah, Zdeno Chara, amazing. Like, I mean, he's not the only really big guy to come out of the program, and out of Prince George,
but he's certainly the biggest, like
tallest NHL player. So yeah, why don't you tell us a bit more about Chara?
So the story with Chara is, when he came to Prince George through the import draft, at that point, nobody really knew who he was. The internet wasn't where it's at right now. And, everything, like, it wasn't globally, athletes weren't so wide known, and it wasn't so widespread. So obviously, Chara comes over here, and, from the stories I've heard from my dad and my grandfather, it's, it was a fascinating thing. So obviously he really made a name for himself here. If it wasn't for him playing for the Cougars, he probably would have never made it to the NHL, and that's the understanding I was getting. So that the Prince George Cougars in the city here played a pretty pivotal role in him getting to that point where he could be in the NHL. And everything that I've heard from him, salt of the earth guy. He's obviously he's a freak of nature. He's 6'9" and just built like a truck. I remember my grandpa was actually telling me, because he used to own a sports store here in town, played against sports. And so I remember one time he said he saw Zdeno Chara washing his billet's truck. And he's so tall, right? His wingspan is just so big. He had his hand he could reach to the top of the truck and just scrub the top. And he just remembers just seeing him scrub the top. And I thought that was just the funniest thing ever. The mental image is great. But yeah, no, Zdeno Chara, he's probably the most well-known, at least among the three with Ham Hughes and Brewer, alumni coming out of the Prince George Cougars organization and coming out of the North.
I'd say there's a few others that we can add to that list. The next one I have on mine anyway is Dustin Buffalon.
And Buffalon, yeah.
Yep, who I believe is 6'8".
No, he's 6'5".
I thought there was somebody else who's 6'8". That
no,
okay,
he's 6'5".
I'm thinking of somebody else, but yeah,
he's like 235 pounds. Like
he's still massive.
He's a brick house.
He's a tank.
Yeah, no, he's built big.
Yeah, so obviously he's a massive player. He's had amazing success. Another defenseman, I might add.
Yep.
Although I'm not sure if he always played defense with the Blackhawks.
No, he played between the defense and wing. I still remember watching the Stanley Cup series, right, where they're playing against the Canucks, and on the power play they put Buffalon right in front of Luongo and just give him hell. But honestly, like Buffalon, yeah, long time defenseman, had some short stints at right wing, and I believe he did win a Stanley Cup with Chicago too, if I don't stand corrected.
I believe he did.
Yeah. So again, another pretty big, well-known name. Very interesting character. Dustin Buffalon is a guy that definitely is against the grain.
Is he retired? Like,
he hasn't. I don't think he's officially retired. I mean, he hasn't signed. I know I was listening to Spittin' Chicklets and they were talking, I think, with Duncan Keith. I can't remember who it was, but it was another NHL player that's pretty connected to Buffalon. And from the sounds of it, he's kind of just gone off the face of the earth a little bit. So he's somewhere in Minnesota and just living life, doing Buffalon things.
Yep. I was going to say, Spittin' Chicklets, if any of you somehow happen to be listening to this, Tyler's a huge fanboy. If you send him anything Biz Nasty themed, he will wear it on our thing and he will rep you guys on our podcast, just so you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a big deal.
Yeah, so who's next on our list? Obviously, there's quite a few players. Who else came out of the Cougars? I mean, there's Sheldon Surrey.
Sheldon Surrey he's a pretty big one. He had a pretty solid initial career as well. Trent Hunter's another one. A lot of the old school fans will know who Trent Hunter is.
No school like the old school, as they say.
Apparently, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I don't know why they say that, Tyler. I mean, us youngins don't seem to understand it, but
no,
whatever.
We don't get it. I guess we're not hip enough.
I don't think that's the word they'd use.
Right.
No, but seriously, like Sheldon Surrey was a very, very solid NHL player. Played for Cougars, came out of the program. Yeah. I mean,
I would say Blair Betts too. I mean, he didn't have the greatest career, but in terms of being a depth forward, he definitely filled in really well with Philadelphia.
Yeah, there's a few other players who came through Prince George. Chris Mason came through Prince George, and this guy, he didn't have a huge NHL career, but Dana Tyrell.
Yep, Dana Tyrell.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I got his autograph on my jersey. I loved that. That was amazing. Sadly, I can't find that jersey anymore. It was my Luongo jersey too. So sad.
Oh, wow.
I know. Sad, man.
I had a Luongo jersey at one point too, and I don't know where that went.
Yeah, it's so sad. When he went to Florida, everything just started to go wrong.
Maybe that's what happened. Maybe I got upset and burnt it or something. I don't know.
I know I didn't burn mine, but yeah.
Right.
So
I mean, another alumni here. You got Ronald Petrovicki, and as well as a Prince George product, Nick Drzenovic. But we kind of went all this way, and we haven't mentioned two of the most recent ones. I mean, we've also got Jansen Harkins and Brendan Gooley. Meanwhile, Gooley you could consider it to be a cup of tea. But those are two very recent players that have come through the North here and that are in the NHL.
And Jansen Harkins, I think it should be mentioned, has made bigger headlines than Gooley. So I remember Harkins, it was kind of a surprise. They're like, the Jets have called up this no-namer guy, like this just dude who played junior somewhere. Yeah, and then he scored, what was it, a game-winning goal in the playoffs or something for the Jets? Yeah, and then suddenly he was like a bigger name within, or at least he had more of like a cult following at that point. But
see, it's very interesting because Jansen Harkins, he was a pretty high second-round pick for them. He was projected to go in the first round in his draft. And so you'd think he would have been a guy that fans would have kind of noticed, right? And I mean, at the time, like when he got called up last year, he was tearing it up for the Manitoba Moose. So I was kind of surprised at how kind of out of the blue it kind of appeared he was a bit of an out of the blue name for people, and I still don't understand why. Like, it almost made me want to question, like, how closely do you follow the team?
The other funny part about it is, out of the Canadian teams, the Manitoba Moose is one of the closest teams to their actual NHL franchise.
Exactly. It didn't make sense to me. And of course, I mean, on that note, Dennis Cholowski as well. He played a year here, first round pick by the Detroit Red Wings, and now he's in the NHL. And I mean, hopefully he kind of bounced up and down last year, but I mean, hopefully he can kind of solidify himself there in the NHL pretty quick here.
Yeah. Is there anybody else who comes to mind? Okay. I think we've spent a lot of time on the Cougars because there's actually been some other players that have come out of the north that have made names for themselves, or just northern BC or smaller communities that you wouldn't have necessarily expected. So somebody that comes to mind is Carey Price.
Yeah. Anaheim
Obviously,
Lake.
yeah. I mean, great for him. Like, he's top goaltender. I mean, what can we really say about him that hasn't been said before, or that we haven't even said ourselves on here before? So,
Oh, I know. Like, one of the best goalies, in the modern NHL era comes from an extremely remote reserve in northern BC. I remember they did a bid on him actually years ago, but his dad actually would have to fly him to Williams Lake to play minor hockey.
yeah.
Like, that's commitment.
And he made it. So good
Yeah.
for him. I mean, that's an incredible story. So
And just for that reason alone, not the fact that he's insanely talented, but just for that reason alone, really makes you want to root for a guy like Carey Price. And of course, along the way, I mean, he's had every reason to, get cocky and be, have that star mentality, but he stayed humble and down to his roots.
I mean, he also could have been thrown to the curb. I mean, that was a very weird goaltending situation in Montreal.
With the Halak
yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember at one point actually I saw it was kind of rumored around, but looking back, apparently there was a deal in place with St. Louis that involved Price instead of Halak. Right. So obviously, I mean, that took some negotiation on the Canadians' part, but could you imagine how different things would be looking right now if it was Carey Price heading to St. Louis rather than
that would have been
Halak?
crazy.
It would have been unreal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very much so. So, I mean, is there any last players that we want to throw in? I mean, we're running out of time a little bit here, so.
Well, let's just look at some of the local products from
Fair
Prince
enough.
George
Let's
that
do
made
it.
on. So we have Turner Stevenson.
Yep.
Obviously, this is an old timer. Like, if you're around the same age as Noah and I, you're definitely have no idea who he is.
Tyler mentioned him. I had no idea who he was. So Tyler's right. Yeah. No.
Yeah. So Turner Stevenson. We've also got here Victor Gervais, Prince George born and raised. Obviously, he went to the Western Hockey League before the Cougars were in fact in Prince George. He was a longtime player for Seattle. Tore it up in his final year with the Thunderbirds before heading on to play pro. And he had 160 points in 69 games.
Hold up. You're not pulling my leg.
No, for real. 160 points in 69 games.
No, that's seriously impressive.
Well, and the fact that, 64 goals as well, like in 69 games, that is just unreal. And the year before that, in 72 games, he had 119 points. Like, he was just a very, very good junior player. And I mean, obviously, like, once his pro career came around, he didn't really make it to the NHL, but he had for the East Coast League in the IHL, he put up some pretty impressive points and, clearly loved playing pro because he played quite a while.
Yep. Another player who's Prince George born and raised, Brandon Manning.
And of course, that's one that we will
I like to point out, he is not known for a good reason.
No.
Which is a little disappointing.
Yeah.
But he is a Prince George boy, so we will mention him. He was the guy who almost ended Connor McDavid's career, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really funny too.
And then he ended up on Edmonton, which is one of the most bizarre moves a GM could think of, in my opinion, especially after all the controversy. Like, Edmonton fans hated him, and then their GM's just like, ha, here he is.
Well, I mean, like, they are pros. I mean, they're definitely able to move around it, but like, the irony is kind of funny. There was like the season right after that incident, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there was that. Also, Ryan House. I mean, he didn't make it to the NHL, but for a while, he was a very promising prospect. Tore it up with the Chilliwack Bruins of the Western Hockey League. It's a shame that he didn't play for the Cougars. That it would have been so awesome to see him play here, but he's back here coaching. He's part of the Caribou Hockey program, so another Northern guy, giving back to the place where it all started, which is really good to see.
All right, so I think that pretty much wraps up that list. So I just want to point out, so we have a few players who I think coming through Prince George could turn into those kind of players. So we have Riley Height,
Mm-hmm.
right? He could be amazing. And then honestly, I could see any of our other top draft picks potentially turning into one of those players. I mean,
Yeah.
Keaton Dalhaniak coming
Cohen
through.
Zemer.
Yeah, Cohen Zemer. Yeah, those
Connor,
guys.
yeah, absolutely.
So the future's bright in Prince George. So yeah.
No, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, if you're a hockey fan up here in Prince George, you need to get excited because there's some really good players, and not only and they're not just players that are drafted. These are players that are signed and committed to play here. So let's get excited.
Excitement is good. You will be excited.
Oh wow, okay.
All right. Yeah, so I think that pretty much wraps up our discussion. So before Tyler closes here, the Northern Capitals have submitted the Ernie Sam Memorial Arena in Fort St. James for the Kraft Hockeyville, what's it called? A grant? I can't remember the exact term for what it is.
It's basically a grand prize of I think it's $25,000.
$250,000 in
Right,
arena
okay.
upgrades. Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's second and third place, I believe. Then it's 60, and then it's 25 or something like that. But yeah, so let's get the Northern Caps to win this. This would be amazing for hockey in the North. I believe we're one of the only girls programs applying for it.
Mhm.
So let's show our support. Let's get them this. The Ernie Sam could definitely use this. And as an added bonus, there is going to be an NHL game that can be played at either the Ernie Sam or an alternate rink if the Northern Caps win. So that's another incentive if you want to see an NHL game played in Northern BC.
I'd be willing to put money on it would be at the CN Center. So
I am too, but I don't know if they
so
announced the alternate arenas, so I didn't want to go out there and say it would be played at the CN.
so just say for the sake, well, because I remember I was reading into it and they were saying that like it would have to be a rink that could suit the game, and if it can't be suited, then they would have to pick.
Well, and it's
the
going to
next
be a
best.
preseason game, so it's going to be like late September, early October.
Yeah.
So it's
The Ernie Sam would be out of commission at that point. So let's just say it's going to be at the CN Center, and if you're in Prince George, not only are you going to get behind supporting
or Northern hockey, if you live in the North or anywhere in BC, if you live even in Western Alberta, you want to see a game here. Great rink. This is an excellent community. Throw your support behind it, please. That would be so cool to be able to see that rink get those upgrades, and especially for the program. Yeah, it's an excellent program. I can't say enough. Tyler with Crimsey's Corner has been interviewing some of the guys from Caribou Hockey who are involved in that program, and yeah, it's excellently run. They have great players, great training. So yeah, just please throw your support behind it.
Yeah, no, this would be it's a really good opportunity for the Northern Caps too. It's a women's hockey in the North. There's a lot of good women hockey players here. So to be able to put that program on display, remember Caribou Hockey and the Northern Capitals, they service all across the North. Like we have players from Terrace, Williams Lake, Quesnel, Vanderhoof, all across the North. We've had players come from Kitimat, and so 100 Mile House. So yeah, just if you're in the North, this is a really big deal. Support the girls, support the program. Remember, you have to submit your vote on Kraft Hockeyville. That's the only way it's going to count. So it's got to go there. Let's support these girls, and let's see if we can win this thing.
Yeah, so we will be putting out more information about Kraft Hockeyville and the Northern Capitals on our RinkMasters Instagram and Facebook pages. So stay tuned for that. And now, Tyler, why don't you wrap up?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to our content today, supporting the Northern hockey, and our interview with Dan O'Connor, the voice of the Vancouver Giants. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a review in the comments below, and we'll see you next week.